We'll now call to order our open session at 6:30 for the Lompoc City Council meeting of Tuesday, April 2nd. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Mosby.
Present.
Councilmember Cordova.
Present.
Councilmember Vega.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Dirk Starbuck.
Present.
Mayor Janelle Osborne.
Here. Report on action taken during closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council met in closed session to discuss the one item on the agenda, real property negotiations under Government Code Section 54956.8. Staff had a discussion with the City Council regarding that item, but no reportable action was taken.
Thank you. Now, if you'll please rise and join us for the invocation with Pastor Darren Hunt and the Pledge of Allegiance to follow.
Dear God, it is truly a privilege to begin this meeting with a moment of prayer to you. You are the creator and author of life, the embodiment of wisdom. That's why we begin this meeting with a moment of invocation, invoking your presence, wisdom, favor, patience, and help. God, we need it. We're passing through a trying season in our city, changes in our community leaders, financial woes from a budgeting standpoint, and a seeming rise in violent crime. But one thing is constant. Our people make this the best city on the Central Coast. Thank you for people who genuinely love their neighbors as themselves. Thank you for those who go out of their way to serve others without concern for payback. Thank you for community organizations that manage to make a difference regardless of budgets. God, help this city council work hard for our citizens, and in their hard work, help them to see the greater good in every situation, working together to solve the problems they can and finding adequate resources for the problems they can't. Please grant our city staff the ability to find their work meaningful and contributing to the benefit of our community. Help our police and fire departments to do their absolute best with what they are given. And we would all pray for their safety, protection, and provision as they carry out the vital duties of serving and protecting us night and day, 24/7. God, we are blessed, and we say thank you. Please be with this council and all those gathered here as the business of this city is conducted. Guide with your wisdom, love now. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now we'll have a few proclamations. If the North County Rape Crisis and Child Protection Center members would please join me at the podium first. So this is a proclamation for Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. Whereas people of all racial, cultural, and economic backgrounds fall victim to sexual assault, sexual violence is widespread and impacts every person in this community. Rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment harm our community, and statistics show child sexual abuse prevention must be a priority to confront the reality that 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls will experience a sexual assault before age of 18. And whereas rape and sexual violence of all kinds continue to occur at an alarming rate, with California having the most reported rapes in the United States, and the Department of Justice stating that an American is sexually assaulted every 98 seconds in the United States. And whereas emotional and physical scars resulting from sexual violence are often permanent, therefore working together to educate this community about sexual violence prevention, supporting survivors, and speaking out against harmful attitudes and actions is so important. And whereas a coalition of organizations exists which directly confronts this crisis, including North County Rape Crisis and Child Protection Center, law enforcement agencies, churches, healthcare providers, and volunteers from the community that serve these agencies who are helping in the effort to end sexual assault. And whereas the prevention is possible when everyone gets involved, increasing education, awareness, and community involvement, recognizing the compassion and dedication of the individuals involved in this effort, and noting the challenges of the victims and survivors of sexual assault and their families and friends as they struggle to cope with the reality of sexual violence. Now, therefore, I, Janelle Osborne, Mayor of the City of Lompoc, do hereby recognize April 2019 as Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month and encourage all residents and businesses to participate in a month full of recognition and activities promoted by the North County Rape Crisis and Child Protection Center to increase awareness of sexual assault and to create solutions in an effort to eliminate sexual violence for this city.
Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge our president of our board, Dave Desmond, and Karen Powers, our finance director as well, that is here to accept. I just wanted to say a few words and say that many people are like, the Rape Crisis Center, how is there one here in Lompoc? They haven't heard about us. We've only been here since 1974. But the reality of it is, and it's not in the newspapers, it's not on the TV, in the last month, we've gone on 12 accompaniments, whether it be at the juvenile hall, whether it be at Marion ER, whether it be someone coming back from vacation and needs to do a restricted report to a 14-year-old girl in the ER. You don't hear those reports, but we're there every day advocating for victims and their families and offering services for no cost. So we hope that you support us this month. April is an important month for us, not only because we're a Child Protection Center, we're going to plant a lot of pinwheels tomorrow for child protection. We educate 15,000 kids basically in North County to know the good touch and bad touch, and dozens of kids come forward every year to say, hey, I was touched in an inappropriate way. And basically, we help save their lives and change their lives, which is important. We're going to have Tom's coming up on the 23rd for Tip and Advocate, and on Thursday, we'll have our vigil to honor those that have come forward. So we're here. Come support us, and thank you so very much.
Now, if I may have the women in the crowd who are here to receive the Equal Pay Day proclamation come forward. So today is Equal Pay Day proclamation. For more than 50 years after the passage of Equal Pay Act, women, especially minority women, continue to suffer the consequences of unequal pay. And whereas according to the U.S. Census Bureau, women working full-time, year-round in 2018 typically earned 80% of what men earned, indicating little change or progress in pay equity. And whereas according to the Graduating to a Pay Gap, a 2012 research report by the American Association of University Women, the gender pay gap is evident 1 year after college graduation, even after controlling for factors known to affect earnings such as occupation, hours worked, and college major. And whereas in 2009, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was signed into law, which gives back to employees their day in court to challenge a pay gap. And now we must pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would amend the Equal Pay Act by closing loopholes and improving the law's effectiveness. And whereas according to one estimate, college-educated women working full-time earn more than $500,000 less than their male peers do over the course of a lifetime. And whereas nearly 4 in 10 mothers are primary breadwinners in their households, and nearly 2/3 are primary or significant earners, making pay equity critical to families' economic security. And whereas a lifetime of lower pay means women have less income to save for retirement and less income counted to in Social Security or the pension benefit formula. And whereas fair pay equity policies can be implemented simply and without undue costs or hardships in both the public and private sector, and whereas fair pay strengthens the security of families today and eases future retirement costs while enhancing the American economy, Tuesday, April 2nd symbolizes the time in 2019 when the wages paid to American women catch up to the wages paid to men from the previous year. Now, therefore, I, Janelle Osborne, Mayor of the City of Lompoc, California, do hereby proclaim Tuesday, April 2nd, 2019 as Equal Pay Day in the City of Lompoc and urge our citizens to recognize the full value of women's skills and significant contributions to the labor force, and further encourage businesses to conduct an internal pay evaluation to ensure women are being paid fairly.
Hi, I'm Pat Grijalva, and I'm currently president of the Lompoc-Vandenberg branch of the American Association of University Women. And with me today are some of our members. Our branch is over 100 strong, and so we're a pretty good force in the city and communities of Lompoc and Vandenberg Village and Vandenberg Air Force Base. Since 1881, the American Association of University Women has been empowering women as individuals and in the community. We worked together as a national grassroots organization to improve the lives of millions of women and their families. Today is Equal Pay Day, and I noted last year it was April 10th, so we've moved ahead just a little tiny bit, but so I guess, about 8 days. But we still are, women as a whole are only being paid 80 cents on the dollar that men earn. So we're really trying to work to get equal pay for women. Every woman deserves a full paycheck. As Janelle said, it really detracts from the amount that women earn over their lifetime, and women have a very good need for a very good salary and support. So thank you, Janelle, and the council for proclaiming this National Equal Pay Day.
And our final proclamation for the evening is for our library. So I'll have our library director come forward, Miss Sarah Bile. So this is National Library Week 2019, whereas today's libraries are not just about books, but what they do for and with people. And whereas libraries of all types are at the heart of cities, towns, schools, and campuses, and whereas libraries have long served as trusted and treasured institutions where people of all backgrounds can be together and connect, and whereas libraries and librarians build strong communities through transformative services, programs, and expertise, and whereas libraries which promote the free exchange of information and ideas for all are cornerstones of democracy, and whereas libraries promote civic engagement by keeping people informed and aware of community events and issues, and whereas librarians and library workers partner with other civic organizations to make sure their communities' needs are being met, and whereas libraries and librarians empower their communities to make informed decisions by providing free access to information, and whereas libraries are a resource for all members of the community, regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or socioeconomic status, by offering services and educational resources that transform lives and strengthen communities. And whereas libraries, librarians, library workers, and supporters across America are celebrating National Library Week, now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Janelle Osborne, Mayor of the City of Lompoc, California, proclaim National Library Week, April 7th through the 13th, 2019. I encourage all residents to visit the library this week and explore what's new at your library and engage with your librarians. Because of you and our library leaders, libraries transform.
Thank you very much. Libraries equal strong communities. Libraries play a unique role in American society as centers for learning, as hubs for human interaction, and as safety nets. It was no accident that public libraries were established when our new democratic nation was young. Libraries educate people, support democracy by providing people with the tools to make informed decisions, and provide a safe and welcoming gathering place where people can explore and discuss ideas without fear of reprisal or censorship. Free access to books, ideas, resources, and information in America's libraries is imperative for the education, employment, enjoyment, and self-government of our citizens. The Lompoc Library is the cornerstone of our community. We are the heart of our community, and from this central vantage point can reach out to all of our citizens. In person and online, we connect people to a whole world of ideas and information. Libraries are a place for education and entertainment, and because they offer free access to all, they bring opportunity to all. Our library is a reflection of our civic pride, a center for lifelong learning which gives people the opportunity to experience new ideas and explore great minds, supporting both school children and adult independent learners. It's a community gathering place as well as a place where materials for recreation and leisure are available. It benefits the economy when business people use library resources for decision making or when employees use the library to improve their job skills. And it serves as an equalizer, offering access to materials and information to all people. Last year, 340,000 library books, movies, or music were checked out in Lompoc Library. That's over 7 items per person for every man, woman, child, and prisoner, because I'm including the prison population. They use the library a ton. They check out stacks of books every week. Just think, Mayor Osborne, if you did not check out 7 items, then that means somebody else in this room checked out 14 to keep our average that. And if no one on the dais, including Stacy, didn't check out 7 items, that's 42 items that one of your neighbors perhaps checked out. That is a lot, 7 per person. Our library is very well loved and well used, and I want to thank you for recognizing National Library Week, and I hope to see you at the library soon. Thank you.
And I just want to add a thank you to all of the organizations here tonight receiving your proclamations for the hard work you're doing in our community to raise awareness for each of your issues and bringing it to the attention of the city so that we can help promote what you do for our community. City manager report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I only have 2 items tonight. The first one is just a reminder that our next budget workshop is Wednesday, April 17th, here in the chambers at 6:30, so same place, same time, but the 17th of April. We will be putting it on the website as well as posting it to some different social media areas to remind everybody. I'd love to see standing room only where everyone is here and participating in the next workshop. Item number 2, it's also a reminder, and that is the State of the City presentation is going to be this Thursday, April 4th, starting at 11:30 a.m. at the Dewey Center. And if you are interested in attending, please go to the Chamber of Commerce website at www.lompoc.com. And that's it.
Thank you. We'll move on to the consent calendar. All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be enacted after one motion in the form listed below. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless good cause is shown prior to council vote. Any items withdrawn from the consent calendar for separate discussion will be addressed immediately before the second oral communication near the end of this meeting. If you wish to speak on an issue listed on consent calendar, the public comment is open at the moment. It's 3 minutes. Please step forward to the microphone. Seeing no one rise, we'll close public comment on the consent calendar and open up consent calendar for either removal or motion or questions. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept consent calendar.
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's vote. And that passes 5-0. We will now have a staff presentation from the Central Safety Committee's Above and Beyond nominations for the second quarter of 2018-2019 by Ms. Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Mayor, thank you. Council members, staff, and the audience, it's my great pleasure once again to come forward and talk about second quarter Above and Beyond awards that have been nominated and presented to the Central Safety Committee. The first nomination and award is Sarah Farrell from Community Development. An estimate of $1,000 was received to remove material from a cubicle window to provide better visibility of the counter and coverage for the counter. Sarah took the initiative and tried using rubbing alcohol to remove the film. Her actions resulted in an increase in coverage for the counter and no additional fees. Second is Carol Hessen, Household Hazardous Waste. Carol gathers and sorts batteries for recycling. While sorting batteries, she found a small box with a stack of U.S. savings bonds. Carol turned the box and bonds into the solid waste department, and they located the owner, an 86-year-old resident that didn't realize he had recycled over $1,000 worth of bonds. So he got his bonds back. The third is Dan Zucker from Solid Waste Collections, one of our collections drivers. He was returning from a personal appointment, and he was first on scene at an auto accident on Harris Grade Road. He called 911 and attended to the driver who had run over the edge of the road and landed on the side of his vehicle. Dan also provided support by telephoning the driver's daughter to schedule the pickup of a child and remained on scene until fire responded to the accident. Next is Sean O'Neill, Urban Forestry, and Diane Nahara, Urban Forestry. A citizen, Bonnie Fairbanks, wrote a thank you card for the tree trimming and customer service for her commercial property provided by Sean and Diane. It's not unusual for staff to get thank you cards or get some kind of recognition. It's just unusual when they're brought to our attention, so we want to be sure you know that it's not always bad news about our workers. Next is Louis Farah Jr. from the Fire Department. Louis is recognized for his assistance with co-spectators at a Cal Poly-based basketball game in saving the life of another spectator. Working with other members of the audience, Louis provided CPR and assisted with the use of an AED. When the San Luis Obispo fire arrived, the individual had a pulse and was transported to an area hospital. The spectator walked out of the hospital 2 days later. And finally, Greg Ratcliffe, the manager for PEG and TAP TV, is recognized for spotting a potential hazard at the Anderson Recreation Center stage. There was an exposed nail on the railing, and patrons sit on the stage and use that railing when they're observing youth basketball games. So his observation and the repair of that nail saved somebody from being injured. Again, it's my great pleasure to talk about these great employees that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kavanaugh. We will now open the floor for oral communications regarding city matters, even if they're not on the current agenda. You have 3 minutes.
Deb Andrews, Mission Hills. Once again, I request you please return the archived City Council meeting videos to the easily accessed format in place prior to our new leadership. Government transparency is vital to liberty and freedom. Tyrants work in darkness. Relatedly, LUSD has just passed a resolution to censure board members. I share with you an example of how the deep state works through puppets and scripts to silence truth and facts from the people. You can read it later, it's long. The first page is a legal transcript of a television news story about a wealthy school district that locked children in a windowless room 8 feet by 8 feet in diameter. 2 days later, there was another television news story. The fire marshal had watched that broadcast and told the school they could no longer do that. It was an outrageous story. Third page, the local paper wrote about it. The next page, 4 months later, I remembered that story about the box. They referred to that little room as the box. I wrote about it, and I wrote about education options for children. You'll notice the next page, that same day, I received a 2-page certified letter from the largest law firm in that city, warning me and threatening me with legal action if I didn't stop talking about the school. They said I was a liar and I slandered. Since I tell the truth, I did not comply. Instead, I went back to the paper that had published my story, and that column is on the very back page. They did a really nice hatchet job on the district and that law firm for threatening me. However, we've been in battle since. We are in a struggle to take back our state and our country from the criminals. We are woke. Return the archived videos to the easily accessed format. I know better than many how important it is that we have the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members. John Lynn, Lompoc resident. In February of 2019, the Mission Hills Community Service District conducted a geological study of wastewater percolation. Contrary to the prior geological reports, this one found that MSCSD wastewater percolates into the Lompoc Valley Aquifer, the source of our drinking water. Previous studies said it percolated into the Lompoc Uplands Aquifer, the source of their drinking water. The percolation of high total dissolved solids and salt water into the Lompoc Valley Aquifer since about 1965 may explain the unusual TDS mix in only 2 of our 10 wells. Number 2 at the end, number 6 at the end of what would have been the Central Avenue extension, and number 8 at A Street where it goes down the river at Coleman Drive. These wells have always had very odd TDS profiles with things that we don't find in our other wells that are even close by. Mission Hills also has I guess at best, an intermittent water sampling process, and some of their salt tests were as low as 100 parts per million and as high as 1,000. 250 is what comes out of our plant. So the revised permit for the plant will be coming up before the regional board on May 9th and 10th. So time is pretty short. I strongly recommend that this council place an item on the agenda for the next council meeting to take a position on this issue. As this affects water and wastewater utilities, it would not have a financial impact or a staffing impact on the general fund. The city has a dedicated water utility attorney and a dedicated wastewater consultant that could provide a staff report. You all need to look at this. I've been out of town for a couple weeks, so I haven't had as much time to work on it as I want to. I certainly will be over the next 2 weeks. But this is some pretty startling information, and it could explain also some issues with salinity in the West Valley ag wells. That's much higher than anywhere else in the valley. So this is a completely different situation from what's gone on in the past. And before a new permit is issued, the city definitely needs to weigh in on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, City Council members, and staff, my name is Sue Copeland. I'm a 30-year resident of Lompoc Valley. I'm coming to you again to state my concerns about the closed session that happened again tonight, about the conference with real property negotiators of approximately 82 acres, including and adjacent to Ken Adams Park, regarding the price and terms of payment. I attended the March 5th meeting where Pale Blue Dot LLC made their presentation. So, and I spoke to you before the last council meeting, before the closed session, and during the open session, and again tonight before the closed session. At the last meeting, the council said that there was no reportable action. So I assumed, or I thought that maybe you had heard my concerns. But seeing it again on tonight's agenda for the closed session, and again hearing no reportable action, I'm really left with not knowing what is happening. My 4 different concerns. Number 1, the city is negotiating for a piece of property without proper public notice, meaning that there is no current request for qualification or other notice about dispensing of the property. Number 2, I reviewed the minutes from the March 5th meeting, which say the council directed staff to return at a later date with a staff report allowing council to discuss and possibly take action regarding a potential project on city-owned property adjacent to and including Ken Adam Park. Excuse me. So number 3, without any public discussion to possibly take action, we're negotiating price and terms. Okay. I remind you, number 4, that this type of action caused a Browns Act violation in the past. And although the city did not recognize or acknowledge that it was, they stated at the time, Mayor Lingle, that we would not do that again, that we would not discuss behind closed doors things other than what is pertinent and confidential. Discussing the possibilities of this is not closed session items, only discussing the price and terms. And I don't see how you can go from no discussion to immediately going to discussing price and terms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor, members of the council, and the audience here. My name's Tim Mahoney. I represent Southern California Gas Company, and the residents of your great city of Lompoc are my customers. So when it's cold outside and you go up and flip on the thermostat and that warm air comes out through your house, that's brought to you by SoCal Gas Company. You jump in a hot pool, hot tub, take a hot shower, well, good chance that that water's heated by natural gas. And likewise, when you're cooking in your home or a restaurant, commercial kitchen, and that blue flame that you cook on, that's SoCal Gas. PG&E and the city of Lompoc provide lighting in your city, but in the general area of North County, it's PG&E, and we're the natural gas company. So I just wanted to let you know a couple of really interesting items that we're doing. So SoCal Gas is going to start going after what we call renewable natural gas. Right now there's 3 areas of methane that are produced by just life in general. Wastewater treatment plants, a sewer plant, dairies, not so much around here, but in the Central Valley, and your landfills and your dumps. All those 3 areas produce methane. That methane right now is just going into the atmosphere. We're going to capture that, odorize it for safety, put it in the pipeline, and it'll be really great for the heavy-duty trucking industry. So I'm talking about trash trucks, refuse trucks, 18-wheelers, and large vehicles like that presently run on diesel. Now they could run on a clean-burning natural gas. So that's pretty good for everybody. It's a win-win because we're taking off the gas that's going into the atmosphere with the greenhouse, and we're actually making something good come out of that. Lastly, there is kind of a movement in California to electrify everything. And I'm an electric customer, just like we all are. And I want my electricity. But I don't want to cook on electricity. I don't want to heat my house on electricity. And I don't want to have hot water on electricity because it's just ineffective and it costs too much money. So what California needs is a balanced energy portfolio where all energy uses are accepted. Because if you leave my service territory going north, and before PG&E comes in serving gas, that whole area in between Paso Robles and King City, they have to use propane and butane, and that's great. But if you take away those type of choices, those people lose. So I want to have choice in energy, and I want to have balanced energy. And that's the message which I wanted to bring today to you and my customers in Lompoc. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Osborne and Councilman, I come before you guys tonight discouraged and afraid. I'm with SoCal's Choice, Inc. We're a cannabis retail dispensary currently in the application process. When we turned in our application September 10th, we were informed that it would be about a 120-day process or sooner to get our retail license. We figured no later than January 10th, we would have this license and be able to start operating and generating revenue. On February 13th, we were promoted to level 3 with the city, and Chris with SCI told us it would be about another month or 2 until we could expect to receive our license from the city. Currently, we're approaching that 2-month time window, and so I come before you guys to kind of see where we're at in the process. I'm afraid because a lot of our small corporation is families that have taken out loans on their homes and so forth to be able to fund this. We had to get a hard money loan in order to purchase the property because banks aren't willing to work with cannabis businesses. So our loan is going to come due in August, and if we don't have any source of revenue, we're not going to be able to refinance. And if we don't have any source of revenue, we're obviously not going to be able to pull or pay off the loan, and we'll have to pull out of operating in Lompoc. We joined the Chamber of Commerce back in October. We donated to the Chalks Festival. All of our contractors are local people. We're trying to help infuse some, money into the city, and here we are just constantly being delayed and pushed back. We expect our construction to be done in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we'd like to see if there's any way we could get a permit going or somehow get some sort of information in regards to the permit process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Osborne and council members, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm going to read because otherwise I get all over the place. In the November 2018 election, City of Santa Maria voters extended and enhanced the Measure U general purpose tax from the 1/4 cent rate approved in June 2012 to the 1 cent rate effective on April 1st, 2019 to maintain and enhance city services. As a result, the overall sales tax rate in Santa Maria will increase from 8% to 8.75% beginning Monday, April 1st. The Measure U revenue will be used to maintain and enhance city services such as neighborhood police patrols, fire protection, 911 emergency response, youth services, and quality of life. It was overwhelmingly approved by voters, 74% of those that voted, which would be 24% more than the required 50% needed to pass. I ask, why are the citizens of Lompoc not being allowed to make this choice? It has been pointed out that it will not cost each citizen the over $500 that has been suggested. Let's instead get real and see what the cost to not do it. I understand living within our means, but when a household cannot balance a budget, oftentimes they look for additional income opportunities so that they don't have to give up critical things. Why can't we do the same thing? I'm aware that we will not generate the amount of money that Santa Maria is going to, but we also don't require as much money as Santa Maria does. At the March 9th goal-setting workshop, the #1 goal established by the City Council was to ensure a safe and supportive city through, and I quote, fully staffed and equipped public safety departments. Yet at the next City Council meeting, the city manager was tasked with writing a budget that will likely cause the loss of both police and fire/emergency personnel. How these two things go together is beyond me. The police department is already understaffed, and they stand to lose more. Likely, once again, we will be fighting to keep the, I didn't say my name, I'm sorry. I'm Karen Powers. I'm a resident here. I just realized that. Oops. We will be fighting to keep the victim advocate position alive within the police department when that position is also needed more than ever for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, and other violent crime. We all know that violent crimes are becoming more and more frequent. Please let us practice our right to vote on raising income to support these critical needs. I also know that even though if voted in, it will take time to put this into effect, but that time is going to come anyway, and it sure would be advantageous when that time arrives to have an adjusted tax rate put into play. Better later than never. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Nicholas Gonzalez, resident of Lompoc. I am here today, I'm sure all of you are aware, but I don't know that the public is generally aware, that LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, that's the governing body that has influence on future growth and expansion of the city of Lompoc, is having a meeting on Thursday, April 4th at 1 p.m. at 511 East Lakeside Parkway in Santa Maria. There's an item on the agenda that is of significant importance to the city of Lompoc. They are going to receive and file a report on LAFCO agriculture and open space policies. Depending on how and what policies are adopted, Lompoc may or may not be able to expand or annex in the future if it's not able to meet these policies. I think it's absolutely imperative that we have representatives from the city of Lompoc attend this meeting and speak on the city's behalf, because if we are not going to somehow at least guarantee the probability of future growth for this city, even if it's at a sustainable level, then we might as well stop discussing the expansion of government, because it will not be necessary. We will then turn to a limited services. We will still have a sewer plant that's only at 50% capacity. It's a game changer, I believe, for the city of Lompoc. So I don't know if you're able to tonight get a consensus, but I think somebody of significant importance really does need to attend that meeting. And I also believe that each and every one of you need to read the report, understand the report, and make a public comment to us residents and tell us what your stance is on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else rise, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the agenda. We'll now have public hearing. Item 3, public hearing to consider Measure A, 5-year local programs of projects for fiscal year 2019 through 23, adoption of resolution number 6246(19), and that will be done by our Principal Civil Engineer, Craig Dearling.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time this evening to consider the critical funding Measure A provides for our city's street infrastructure and operations. This presentation includes the city's 5-year program of projects, and the council is required to annually adopt that before the beginning of the next fiscal year in order to get our Measure A funding allocation. So Measure A is the largest source for the city of road revenue, shown in green at the bottom of the slide. 44% for this coming year is the estimate. And we show the other sources up there: state gas tax. This is also state gas tax. This has to be one source. This maintenance of effort required by the state, and then a little bit of other funding, mostly from the state. Road funds serve many uses here, and the basic 2 categories are citywide operations and capital projects. And the main difference is citywide operations keep things working, but they don't necessarily extend their useful life, whereas operations, capital projects extend the useful life. So here's just a graphic of that. Operations, often our street maintenance crew, urban forestry, and others are some of the first responders to incidents, and these operations don't add anything to the pavement or make anything last longer, but they keep the road useful. Capital projects, on the other hand, are limited in their useful life, timing, location. Well, they add useful life. They're limited in their timing, location, and contract scope. So because they cost more, we can't spread them out everywhere. So for a complete street program, we need both operations and capital projects. We've got photos of each in the slide. Operations on the left, capital on the right. So as we've discussed kind of every year doing this presentation, road needs exceed revenues. Because they exceed revenues, the city has significantly reduced street operations and street capital projects. And as I discussed, without adequate operations, the daily immediate needs cannot be met. Without capital projects, the pavement condition declines and the condition of other infrastructure declines. My button's not advancing, sorry. There we go, thanks. So maybe first I'll point out the kind of the industry standard goal for our citywide pavement condition index is 70. Ours, including all pavement, is a 53. If we exclude alleys, it's a 58. So we're a little below the standard goal, largely because we haven't had the money to put into the pavement to keep it at the condition we want it to be. So over the last 10 years, this red line is the PCI dropping, basically, and these orange bars are expenditures of capital projects. And for the most part, in the first handful of years, a lot of those expenditures were more major overlays and rehabilitation on busy arterial streets. So they weren't able to spread over as large of area and didn't bump the PCI as much as some. And then in these later years, we had even less money to spend, so the PCI dropped more. This is a projection for the next 10 years with 4 different expenditure scenarios. The very bottom red line is not spending anything. The line just above that is spending $1 million per year using industry standard methods, which are more like remove and replace, overlay, things that are a little more expensive in unit cost. The next line above that is spending $1 million a year, similarly, except using cost-effective techniques like we've been using the last few years, which I'll talk a little more in detail about it later. We can preserve the pavement at a lower cost, although there are a few trade-offs, which I can get into later. And the top line is $6 million a year using standard methods. So just to talk a little more about PCI, we haven't gone into as much detail in previous years, why we calculate PCI. And basically the Pavement Condition Index, or PCI, describes the state or readiness of use of the pavement. So whether you're calculating an individual street segment or, as we were talking more in the broader sense, the average for the whole city. So it's state of being or readiness of use. And we use the condition index to evaluate where we're at, to determine the rate of deterioration, project its future condition, gauge maintenance and rehabilitation needs, and estimate the cost to repair and maintain our network. The PCI is a tool and is approximate, it's not exact, so it's a good indicator. It's not absolute to the digit. How PCI is calculated. The city uses the Street Saver pavement management system, and most pavement management systems run generally using similar principles. They vary in which distress types they collect and the ways those are collected. So using Street Saver, we collect the distresses that Street Saver uses, including their severities, over about 10% of our street pavement area that we survey. There's a list of the distresses at the bottom of the slide. And basically the more serious ones are alligator cracking, rutting, distortions, which are abrupt local bumps and sags, and raveling, which is significant loss of aggregate from the surface. So for each unit of roadway being evaluated, the surface area of each distress type at each of 3 severity levels is summed or added together, divided by the total area of that unit of roadway, and then Street Saver calculates the PCI from that. So in the next slide, I'll show a photo of different PCI values, but in that slide, the worst photo, so the very bottom right photo in the next slide, has a PCI of 3. And the distresses that caused that to arrive at 3 were high severity alligator cracking over about half of the inspection area, medium severity over another 8.9%, some distortions, so some bumps and depressions, and then some patching. So here's that next slide that shows, so this 3 down here in the bottom right is what those distresses reflected. This basically just shows one example of what a road could look like at each of those PCI levels. So at 72, that's pretty close to the industry standard desire as an average for the city. Starting to see single line alligator cracking in wheel paths and perhaps a crack on this paving joint. Otherwise, the pavement service may have lost some fines, but that's about it. It's pretty good. Moving down to the 58, the cracking in the wheel paths is accelerating and even broadening out in the next slide. This 31 over here, that's actually a tape measure inside of one of the cracks. So the severity increases as your PCI goes down. This 11, generally to get a low PCI like that, the distress has to be over a good part of the inspection unit area. So the 3 and the 11 had distress over a lot of the pavement area, like the three I explained in the previous slide. 50% of the area had high severity alligator cracking. So basically up top, the summary up here is PCI reports distress severity and prevalence. So how severe the distress is and how widespread it is. What PCI means to road users and to the city as the owner. For road users, the PCI decreases safety, ride quality, reliability, and appearance of the roadway. So as PCI decreases, those things decrease. For the city as the owner and operator and maintenance provider, as PCI decreases, the urgent and recurring repairs increase. So things are urgent and immediately needed. The cost of repairs increases and customer satisfaction decreases. The city has a very large street network. Even though our city is only about 2 miles by 2 miles, there's a lot of streets packed in there. So we have 130 center miles of street, and here's how they're broken down. 10.5 miles of arterials, those are the highest traffic volumes, generally the highest speeds also. 24.5 of collectors, the next highest traffic volumes. 64.7 of residential or local, and 30.3 of alleys. So that the network PCI is calculated the same way in area average. And here's those PCIs for each category. 74 for the arterials, kind of the most important ones, 60 for the collectors, 53 for the residential locals, 25 for the alleys. And those are the areas in square feet of those categories. So the needs and the uses of each category are a little different. So we have 25.5 million square feet or so of street pavement surface. 11.2%, like I showed on the previous slide, is arterials. And they have a pretty good PCI of 74 average. And we kind of need to keep them in good condition because they generally have the highest speeds, the highest traffic volumes. They're the biggest safety concern, and they deteriorate the most rapidly. They have the most truck and heavy traffic. So arterials have been the highest priority for us with our limited street maintenance revenue. Next down the list, collectors, 22.8. They have a PCI of 60, generally have the next highest traffic volumes, somewhat higher than average speeds, and also deteriorate more rapidly because of those higher volumes. So they've been the second highest priority. Unfortunately, with limited funding, the bottom of the list doesn't get a lot of attention. So 53.4% of our pavement area being residential and local streets have an average PCI of 53 and generally have low speeds and low traffic volumes. Alleys similarly, PCI 25, have the lowest speeds generally and lowest traffic volumes, although refuse trucks beat them up. Cost to maintain the city street network. So as we just looked at, the network is big. The other problem is it's really expensive to rehabilitate pavement. So deep rehabilitation reconstruction, such as was historically done for low PCI values, like below 25 or sometimes even higher than that, is estimated to cost $10 plus per square foot. So if we did that to all of just our alleys, that would be $32 million. Overlays, just taking big steps. Next step, less serious than a deep rehabilitation or reconstruction, maybe $4 to $6 a square foot. If we did that to all of our collectors and residential streets, it'd be around $74 million. Dig outs and cape seals, so this is a little getting into the more cost-effective treatments. So this is what we did this past year on Central Avenue and a number of other streets, where dig outs are basically isolated, deeper repairs of failures, and then a cape seal is a chip seal with a slurry or microsurfacing on top of it. Those are a lot cheaper in unit area and can extend the life a lot. So we perform those for about $1.50 per square foot through 3 projects really. So one was a dig out project. We're required to upgrade all these curb ramps with those, so that was included in the $1.50, and then place the cape seal. So that's a pretty good option for us. There are a few drawbacks with that because it's not as smooth as an overlay. When you get an overlay, the pavement is softer for a while and it rides smooth. When you do a cape seal, it feels like the road used to feel, except that you've repaired some of the deeper failures. And then down the bottom of this list, slurry seals, microsurfacings. That was a part of our cape seal project slurries and micros are about the same thing, just a little bit difference in the binder. So they're a little cheaper because it's only one layer, 65 cents a square foot, and that was a component of what we did this last fall also. So we're trying to use as many cost-effective strategies to maximize our dollars as we can, which basically means trying to spread our limited funding over as big of area as possible, because we have a really big network. It's all deteriorating over time. So we're trying to do the best we can to spread it out and to prioritize our funding to take care of what's most important first and see how far we can get that to go. The cost-effective measures save material, labor, transportation costs. They prolong useful life. But like I mentioned, they're generally less smooth riding than the conventional robust pavement rehabilitation. And repeated heavy vehicle loads are the leading factor in pavement deterioration. So this is basically similar information to what's in the staff report. The city's pavement management system, Street Saver, currently reports that to get up to a PCI average of 70 citywide, we need to spend $50 million. To maintain it at 70, we need to spend $7 million a year. And using all existing revenue sources, including the recent SB1 state funding that came in, the city projects to have about $1 million per year available for the capital program that these numbers reflect. So we don't have 7, we have 1. So, and for the most part, that 1 is shown in the overlays and rehabilitation row of the program of projects that'll be on one of the following slides. A little more about Measure A and road revenues. Citywide, street, urban forestry, and engineering operations. So like we looked at the beginning of the slideshow, operations that keep things usable require most of the city's existing road revenues. It's also described, I think I have the table on the next slide, as well as in the staff report. So there's a list of the revenue sources. And because the state passed SB1 and we're getting a little more funding from gas taxes now, as well as the savings that we've achieved through staffing reductions, we've got that $1 million a year going forward. So here's basically the same tables that are in the staff report for revenue and needs. So all the revenues up top. The new SB1 road maintenance and rehabilitation line is here, about $700,000. That bill also replaced some gas tax funding that hadn't been at its same level for the past few years. So we're up to about 1.1 on gas tax. So maybe we added $950 to $1 million of additional funding through that. And then we have our other sources, Measure A being the biggest one. And then down here, the row that's in yellow is our street rehabilitation projects that are funded. So funded with this existing revenue. In this one, we show $1 million in this table. $750 of that is from Measure A, $250 is from gas tax. So it won't. The million doesn't match the POP table, but that's the reason for the difference. Similarly, $2 million of this is Measure A and $250 is from gas tax. This next line down here is the balance of needs for a $6 million a year capital program. So this is unfunded. We don't have this $4 million, $5 million, 3.7. That's what we need to keep our PCI level using the industry standard methods. And otherwise, all the other stuff is the same as in the staff report. Here's an example of one of our cost-effective projects from 2013. So we did a dig-out repair here, and then we did a Cape Seal. And 5 years later, it's looking great. So we've had great success with those, and if we can match the smoothest we need with the speeds that we're seeing on these streets, they can work well for us. So operationally, we continually strive to improve the efficiency of operations, and we've reduced our staffing quite a bit. We plan to continue a number of these cost-effective capital projects that we've been doing in order to extend useful life at several times less cost than the traditional methods. And we also schedule those kind of sequentially, so this last fall, we did our dig outs kind of immediately before the Cape Seal project so that we could maximize our usefulness of those repairs. So now we're getting into the program projects table that's attached to the staff report. These are basically a report of expenditures for the last fiscal year that closed, FY 17-18. It just shows what we spent for the street maintenance division, engineering division, urban forestry division, and then we didn't do an overlay and rehabilitation project that year. That's either a payment to a consultant or a little bit of retention payment or something for a previous project. And then down here is our alternative transportation expenditure, which is required to be 15% of what we get over discrete 5-year periods. This is the main part of the program of projects table. So up top, we estimate we'll carry over $2.3 million to the coming fiscal year, and this second row here is the revenue estimates we got from SBCAG. So we estimate we'll get $2.24 million this year and so on. And the proposed expenditures are down here. So from Measure A, 435 to street maintenance and so on. So this year, rather than something in the overlay and rehabilitation row for pavement, we have this urgent pavement patching contracts row. So it'll probably be a mix of dig outs where those are necessary and lesser patches where we can get by with those just to fix as much as we can. This is the slide exclusively about the alternative transportation requirement, and like I mentioned, 15% of what we get in Measure A we're required to spend on alternative transportation. So this top number is what we expect to get in the 5-year period that we're reporting on now. 1.2 million is what we've spent so far through the last closed fiscal year, so the first 3 fiscal years of that 5-year period. And 1.75 is what we project to spend to meet our 15 or just over 15%. So kind of wrapping up the presentation, we need to adopt the POP to receive our Measure A funding for the next fiscal year, and it's a critical component of our road operations and capital programs. So the staff recommendation is to hold the public hearing, take input on this program of projects, and adopt the resolution that's attached or provide alternate direction. Thank you.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Thank you, Craig. 2 questions. First one is, you say you take a sample of 10% of the streets, excluding alleys, to come up with the PCI. Do you have a list of streets, or do you just randomly go and choose a street? How does that work? What 10 streets do you base this on?
Well, it's all streets eventually. We don't do all of them as often as others, like arterials, the biggest and most important streets we do most often. We did all of those this last year. So arterials are the most frequent, collectors would be next, and then probably residential's next, and alleys last.
2 and 3, or you said you used 10?
Oh, so yeah, we do 10% of the area. So we do every street, just 10% of its area. So sorry, I didn't explain the detailed methods of it. So say a block is 500 feet long, we inspect 10% of that length, basically. So
and then you program it into a computer, and a computer basically tells you what our PCI is then based on the information on 10% of the streets that you do the survey on.
Yeah, 10% of every street, yeah. So we will inspect every street, and we have inspected every street, but we only inspect 10% of the area of those streets. So it's a sample that's 10% of the area of the total.
Okay. I just, for my own clarity, Table 1 in the staff report here showed the revenues, and I'll use the FY 18-19 at $5 million total revenue that came in to the city. When you go into the expenditures, right off the bat, it appears as though our administrative and labor cost was $3.5 million. Is that how I've read that?
A lot of it is staff and operational costs, and some of that is contract costs as well.
Contract as in for labor or contracting? I mean, it leaves $1.5 million basically out of that. We've $3.5 million coming back into City Hall, and $1.5 million going out into the street is what it says, is what I'm interpreting this
Okay,
to be.
yeah, well, it's not so much into City Hall, it's more to the corporate yard. So like the street maintenance division going out and patching potholes and doing all the stuff listed on.
That's included, our street crews, patching, et cetera,
Yeah,
is in here.
Yeah, so what we were trying to say here in the little cell that we had in this table was city street maintenance division, urban forestry division, trimming the trees and all the stuff they do, and engineering division is for the street-related portion of the work they do.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mosby.
It seems to me like the whole design of this is kind of set up to fail. You're so short money. I mean, at what time, when streets were put in, what was the anticipated revenue to keep them maintained? It just seems like after 30 or 40 years, we run into this, because you guys have been talking about this as long as I've been coming to council meetings, that we have this huge unfunded maintenance component that's sitting out, looming over our head. So, I mean, what was the original plan when they put streets in?
Yeah, it's a tough issue. It seems historically, back before my time, it seems that there was more revenue per unit street than there seems to be now. But I wasn't working the numbers back then, so
Maybe the city manager can answer some more.
Yeah, it is a no-win situation. It's been this way for the whole state of California because over the course of the years, the static gas tax that came in stayed level for many, many years. But in the same time, the prices went up for all of the oil and everything else they use in the tar and pavement. So that's what's impacting so many different cities right now is there was no good revenue stream coming in as prices went up, gas tax stayed the same, and now you have sort of that opposite with more fuel-efficient cars, people aren't buying as much, or the electric cars. So as we get better environmentally, it's costing us in other ways to maintain streets.
Those 8 mile per gallon cars are hurting us. They're not around. And you know, I know SB1 was a significant amount of money. It was estimated by some of the people out there that it was going to be about $700 per family. So roughly we have about $7 million taken out of this local community every year. I mean, it's nice to see we're getting almost $1 million back. And I know the third lane on the 101 in Santa Barbara is getting a couple $100 million directed down that way. So, I mean, some people seem to be healing. Is there a way that we can fight for more of that component, of the SB1 component? Or are we kind of just set with what we get?
the direct allocation formula is set. We can pursue grants for whatever projects they provide grants for, like the 101 widening, but I don't know that we have any competitive opportunity for that, and they don't seem to like to fund pavement rehabilitation.
Yeah, well, you know, I know we have a limited general fund component, and we're at 112%, I think, just in the public safety component alone. So, I mean, what are your anticipated moves? You got a $50 million rehab looming over here. It's not going away. So what are the plans?
So, well, basically, I can back up to the slide, but way back here in the slideshow, our anticipated, well, there it is. This is basically our anticipated move, is to get that green line as flat as possible. So rather than go with the more expensive standard approaches, wherever we can be cost effective, get the green line as flat as possible. Wherever there's opportunity to bring more money in, we'll go for it. It's just not common that grant funding is offered for pavement rehabilitation.
Yeah, so we got significant needs and wants in your area. I know, there's discussions about the public safety component, but as you mentioned, the first responders, and sometime are your crews that are getting there, whether it's a tree down, or I guess it'd be kind of hard for them to get there if you hit that in those lower PCI numbers, right?
It'll make it slower, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Any additional questions for staff? Okay. Any additional comments before I open it to the public? Okay. So we'll open it up to the public comment on this item. You have 3 minutes.
Nick Gonzalez, Lompoc resident. In the cost allocation study and enterprise reimbursement, there was discussion and methodology of charging right-of-way cost. I didn't see any of the revenue in there. So where does that revenue go that's transferred from the enterprise funds for those types of costs?
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment and return discussion to council. Councilmember Mosby.
Maybe Mr. Albro can answer that one. Enterprise reimbursement component, where is it acknowledged in that? Would that be in the main revenue?
For the money that comes in from the utilities, we set it aside in Fund 36, the right-of-way maintenance. We haven't done anything with it yet, so it's basically just set it aside. But that's the intent, is to help bolster up the road rehabilitation, its incentives.
So there's another revenue stream that's not identified? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes, there is.
How much is in that account approximately?
I think when we closed last year, around 900,000, a million, somewhere in that effect. But there's other money in there too. I think there's about 600 that was attributed from the cost reimbursement.
Thank you.
Any additional questions, discussion, motion? Councilmember Vega.
It seems imperative that this is a necessary funding mechanism for the repair of the roads. We've gone through this before, and I think that's something that we can't leave the state money on the table. So I'm going to make a motion that we accept staff recommendation as far as for the road repair.
I'll second.
Councilmember Starbuck seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. And that passes 5-0. New business, item 4, first reading of ordinance number 1667, parentheses 19, and consideration of urgency ordinance number 1668, parentheses 19, adding Lompoc Municipal Code Chapter 12.38, regulating installation of wireless telecommunication facilities in the public right-of-way, adoption of resolution number 6247, parentheses 19, establishing a policy for approving a small wireless facility, presentation components from Planning Manager Brian Halverson, Public Works Director Mike Luther, and City Attorney Jeff Malave.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just waiting for the PowerPoint to come up. Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, tonight we're here with 2 ordinances and 1 resolution, as you noted. We're here because of a recent FCC order that applies to all cities and local governments regarding the arrival of 5G wireless data technology. We're probably all familiar with 4G technology that we use on our cell phones for access to the internet. It's a data technology that is provided to all of our cell phones through towers and cell sites, smaller cell sites around the city. 5G is the next generation of that technology. 5G will result in faster internet with higher capacity to accommodate streaming video, social media, internet in vehicles, internet in self-driving cars, and internet in home appliances. The difference between the old 4G technology and the new 5G technology is that this new 5G technology, it uses lower power transmitters that only have a coverage area of about 400 feet around each transmitter, as opposed to what we're more familiar with, with cell towers and 4G data transmitters that have a wider coverage area. What that means is cities are, or actually the wireless industry, in order to have acceptable coverage to all their customers, they're going to need more locations where there are transmitters. And what these are being called are small wireless facilities. And so what the wireless industry has found is most convenient to have that amount of transmitters are poles that are already located in the public right-of-way, such as utility poles, street light poles, or even new freestanding poles. And these are on the streets, on the sidewalks, in the medians, in the parkways. All of those areas are considered to be public right-of-way that this new FCC order will apply to. And what this new FCC order, the reason why it was issued by the Federal Communications Commission is to facilitate the deployment of this new 5G wireless technology. And what it does is it severely limits the discretion and the authority of local governments to regulate or prohibit these small wireless facilities for 5G technology in city public right-of-way. We have the ordinances before you tonight and the resolution because the city's existing code is outdated and it is not adequate to regulate small wireless facilities for 5G, especially after the new FCC order that was issued in September of 2018. I have a picture that unfortunately is a little bit small up on that slide that shows an example of what we're talking about. These small wireless facility transmitters, which everyone is going to start seeing more and more. If you want to take a look at how they would look on a street light, that's over on to the left. On a utility pole, an example is in the middle. And on the right is a freestanding pole that is erected solely for the small wireless facility transmitter. The boxes that are a little bit lower on the pole, on each of those poles, is a cabinet that holds equipment that more than one wireless company can use for their facility on that particular pole. So generally, for wireless facilities today under 4G and for wireless towers, if they were going to be operating in the public right-of-way or they applied to the city to operate in the public right-of-way, that's our right-of-way, and we would have the ability to negotiate a lease with the wireless company for them to pay rent. We'd be able to put conditions on their how the facility appears and its aesthetics, because it is the city's public right-of-way. But what this FCC order does for 5G small wireless facilities is it takes away, to a significant extent, our ability to regulate and negotiate for these facilities on our sidewalks and our streets, our telephone poles, and our streetlight poles. It caps all of the fees that local government can charge to the wireless industry for these facilities to only the local government's cost of having that facility on one of our poles in the public right-of-way. And the estimate that's out there is about $500 to $1,500 a year is going to be about as much as we can charge for, and that includes rent, for the wireless industry to be able to use our public right-of-way for these facilities, and that's a federally mandated requirement. It also imposes mandatory timelines that the city has for processing applications, which are extremely tight timelines. 60 days if the facility is to be placed on an existing pole or structure, and 90 days if the facility is to be, if a new pole or a new structure is what the applicant is applying for And that includes not only the design review process and any appeal process and the encroachment permit process, but it also includes building permit, traffic control permits for the installation. All of that needs to be done within either these 60-day or 90-day time periods. The other thing that the FCC order does is it preempts our local ability to regulate for aesthetics. As you all might be familiar with, for wireless facilities up until this point, we had pretty broad discretion to require cell towers to be stealth, you've seen the palm trees, you've seen the water towers that hide what that facility really is. We don't have that level of discretion anymore under this new FCC order for 5G small facilities. We are only allowed to impose aesthetic requirements that are reasonable, no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure deployments, objective, and published in advance. And published in advance is the important one, and that's the reason we're here tonight. It's because this new FCC order goes into effect on April 14th. And if we don't have our aesthetic guidelines and our aesthetic rules adopted and published by April 14th, then we will lose the ability to impose those aesthetic regulations until we do get them adopted. So on April 14th, if we don't have this in place, we could get a number of applications from the wireless industry, and we wouldn't be able to impose our aesthetic regulations. Lompoc Municipal Code 17.164.030D is the section of our code that regulates aesthetics for wireless facilities on private property. And it specifically does not apply to wireless facilities in the public right-of-way. That's why we have these ordinances tonight, so that we have some regulations for facilities in the public right-of-way. As I mentioned before, the FCC order has some limits on the aesthetic regulations that we can impose. The essential summary of it is that we can only impose things that are technically feasible for the wireless applicant to provide. We can't make them alter their facility, their small wireless facility, in a way that is so economically burdensome that it would make it technically infeasible for them to operate that cell site. The ordinance adds a new chapter to the Lompoc Municipal Code, Chapter 12.38. It's going to be entitled Wireless Telecommunications Facilities in the Public Right-of-Way. It includes permit and design review procedures for these small wireless facilities, and as well as operation and maintenance standards. And the ordinance is really intended to balance the community's need for these wireless services with the industry's need to deploy their facilities and to deploy 5G quickly, and also balances the city's obligation to maintain safety and aesthetic quality of our neighborhoods and our sidewalks and streets in the city. The ordinance has insurance requirements for the applicant. The ordinance has an indemnity requirement for the applicant that if the city is sued due to anything having to do with these facilities when they're in our public right-of-way, on our street poles or our utility poles, that the city is not going to be responsible for any damages. In a lawsuit like that, it's going to be the wireless company who is the applicant. The ordinance also requires a performance bond that the applicant must post, so that at the time when the wireless company has moved on to another technology and they're finished using this piece of equipment on our pole, we have the money to take it down and to dispose of it properly. The ordinance also requires the city to give notice to the public within 500 feet of any of these facilities when we get an application, so that the neighboring property owners and tenants are aware that there is an application filed for their area. Because of the very, very short timelines that we have to process and make a decision on these applications, we are doing what all cities have decided they must do, and that is to make this an administrative approval process as opposed to a planning commission or city council approval process, because there simply just is not enough time to process the application and decide the application within 60 or 90 days if we have to bring it to planning commission and or council. So it's going to be a staff level approval. The Planning Commission is going to be heading up the processing of the applications, and they're going to be coordinating with all of the other departments to get input on whether the facility should be approved or not. Public Works is going to handle the encroachment permit process, because after the design review and the aesthetics are approved, the applicant will need to get an encroachment permit because it is in our public right-of-way. And as I mentioned earlier, the applicant will still need to get traffic control plans and a building permit, and in some cases a license to attach to our city infrastructure, and that all must be done within the shot clock time limit. The aesthetic regulations that we have drafted and that we are recommending for council approval are in resolution number 6247, parens 19. That's attachment 3 to the staff report. And really the heart of those design regulations are at pages 10 to 13 of that resolution. Just to briefly go over the aesthetic regulations that we're recommending. They require that the paint color and the design of these facilities blend in with the surroundings, that they have no lights on them unless lights are required by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. There are concealment regulations, what we call concealment regulations, to ensure that these facilities have a low profile, and they're required to be no more than 3 cubic feet in volume. That is a size regulation that we're allowed to impose. And then there's some locational regulations, and they are I guess I call it a preference system. So we've put in the regulations that if an applicant wants to locate one of their facilities on a street pole or a utility pole that is immediately adjacent to a building, say right in front of the window of a building, and there's another pole that's within 250 feet that is between buildings, not right in front of a building or a window, then our rules will require the applicant to use that pole that's between buildings on the street as opposed to right in front of the building. It's just an example. Another example is that if there is an existing pole within 250 feet of where this applicant wants to put a new freestanding pole, our regulations require the applicant to use that existing pole before they build any new freestanding pole just for a wireless facility. Our regulations say that in residential areas, these obviously residents will want to use 5G in residential areas, and if these transmitters only have 400 feet of coverage, we're going to need to have some of these facilities in residential areas. So the rule that we have as far as where they can be located in residential areas are the applicant applies for a certain spot in the sidewalk or in the median in a residential area, and our rule says that if there's a collector road or an arterial road in that residential district within 250 feet, the applicant has to put that, they have to use a pole or put that facility on the collector road or the arterial road before they put it on a residential, what we would think of as a normal residential street with houses on it. The last thing I'll say about the regulations that we're recommending is that we're not allowing these facilities on traffic signal poles, so street lights we are allowing, but traffic signal poles we're not allowing, and not allowing them on any kind of street signs that are in our public right-of-way. The CEQA, the environmental review for this item, is what's called the common sense exemption. We're recommending that the council make a determination that this project, these ordinances, don't have a possibility of having a significant impact on the environment. Staff is going to bring back at a later date a proposed master license agreement and fee resolution that will be used when we want to enter into license agreements with these applicants for the use of our city public right-of-way. The two ordinances we have tonight are a little bit irregular. Well, we have a regular ordinance and we have an urgency ordinance. They are identical ordinances. They have all of the same provisions, except that the regular ordinance is just like any other ordinance that will have a first and second reading, and then it will take effect 30 days later. The reason that we need to have an urgency ordinance is because of this April 14th deadline we have to get our regulations in place. The urgency ordinance takes effect immediately without having a second reading or a 30-day wait period. But that urgency ordinance does require a 4/5 vote of the council, so at least 4 votes of the council. And it contains findings saying that this ordinance is necessary for the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. And for that protection, it needs to take effect immediately. I think we can make those findings because of the April 14th deadline that is forthcoming. So this ordinance and the resolution will bring the city into compliance with the laws governing wireless telecommunications facilities, into compliance with the FCC's recent order, and will allow the city to impose aesthetic and other design requirements on these 5G wireless facilities, whereas if we did not adopt these standards, we would not have any regulatory authority over these facilities. So staff's recommendation is to introduce the regular ordinance number 1667-19, to adopt the urgency ordinance number 1668-19, and to adopt resolution number 6247-19, or provide alternative direction. That concludes the staff report. I'm available for questions. This is not a public hearing item, but we should open it for public comment as well after questions.
Councilmember Mosby.
How many of these things do we look at maybe having installed in town? Is there any idea? I mean, one every 400 foot, that's a lot of these units.
I wanted to mention that I do have Planning Director Brian Halverson and Mike Luther from Public Works here who might be able to have an estimate for you on that.
Does anybody, I know it's a short amount of time and window, but does anybody have?
Planning Manager. It's really hard to anticipate right now because we haven't had a lot that have come in, and generally what we're seeing is the poles that look like either a palm tree or a pine tree and things like that. But it's really hard because we just haven't got a lot that have been proposed. So it's just really hard to anticipate. But of course, the release of that 5G technology is really, I think, going to increase, and so we should start to see those come in, but we just haven't so far. That's why it's so important for this ordinance to be in place so that we're ready for those applications as they come in and we can have some standards. So, but it's really, really hard to anticipate how many we're going to get.
And this could be a significant revenue if there's 1,000 of them. I mean, that's $1,500 a piece. It'd be
Yeah, I mean,
significant.
once we get the license agreements and we can negotiate with the carriers, yes. But as far as the application, that's just a cost recovery. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that shapes out.
Okay. I had, probably one of the more startling items that's in the staff report where it says, this ordinance will impose mandatory timelines for processing and considering applications, known as shot clocks of 60 days for the SWFs. Add to existing structures, regardless of whether the structure already supports a wireless service, and 90 days for an SWFs proposing a new structure. The shortened shot clocks also apply to applications on private property. Are we going to be able to meet these timelines?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is very, very tight, as Mr. Malavi stated. It's administrative, so that's the key component. If we had to actually have public hearings, either at the Planning Commission level or the City Council level, I don't think we'd be able to meet those. It would be very, very difficult. I think at the same time, but I'll let Mr. Malavi address that we still have the ability, once someone submits an application, if we deem it incomplete, then it's going to be in their court. And so once we receive it back, like a resubmittal or the initial submittal, that's where we have to meet those timelines. But let's just say they get it to us and within 2 weeks we get comments back, then, you know, it's in their court. And so they could take several months before they resubmit. So not all of that time is necessarily in our court. It would be in the applicant's court as well. But it's going to be difficult. But I think we have the staffing right now to be able to do that, but it is a very short timeline. I do want to say, it wasn't brought up, but there are items that may actually go to the Planning Commission, because if they're, I can't remember if Mr. Malavi stated there's minor and major projects, but some larger ones could actually go to the Planning Commission. I want to say like ones that are like 60 feet tall, that could be the real large ones. Those would be required to go to a hearing at the Planning Commission, but that's far and few between, because as we're talking about tonight, it's small cell sites, small wireless facilities.
Maybe.
Yeah, just to add on to that, anything that's over 50 feet, like the 60-foot ones that Brian was referring to, they don't qualify for the protections of this FCC order, so they're not small wireless facilities, so they would not have the shot clock. We therefore would have time to bring it to Planning Commission.
And it also says in the report, it says if a city does not render decision on an SWF application within a specified amount of time period, 60 days for installation on existing structures and 90 days on new structures, the failure to meet the deadline for action will be presumed to violate federal law. What happens if you don't meet those timelines?
Then you're in violation, the city would be in violation of the FCC order, and there presumably are some penalties in federal law for violating federal law. It is a good point, though, because it doesn't necessarily mean that we must approve. The FCC could have said in their order that that means if we miss the deadline, if we blow the 60 days, then the application's automatically approved. It doesn't say that. It just says we have to do it within 60 days, and then there are penalties if we don't.
Okay, I just wondering if this process can be applied in other projects. Is this just, do you know of anything else that uses this type of mechanism? A 60 and 90-day requirement type of?
There have been other shot clocks for cell towers in the past in federal law that I believe still exist. But this one is quite a stringent time requirement that they're imposing on us. But other than cell facilities, I mean, we have the Permit Streamlining Act, which imposes a timeline on development projects for the city to make a decision on development projects. There's various different timelines depending on the type of development project and the type of CEQA that's done. So yeah, that is another analogy. The Permit Streamlining Act imposes somewhat similar types of deadlines.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions for staff? Councilmember Cordova.
Do we know how many are the G4 existing towers that we have up?
I do not know the answer to that, but maybe Mr. Halverson.
Okay, and then are those going to be taken down, or are those going to transition out? How are we going to handle the removal or of those?
I think that's up to the wireless carriers. If they feel the need that they no longer have a need for those 4G facilities, then they would take them down, or we have performance bonds with them to take them down if they don't.
And then I noticed that on the report you mentioned something about there is actually a cap on fees that can now be charged. What was the amount that you mentioned because it's not in the report, and I thought you mentioned an amount.
What's being talked about in the legal and wireless industry is $500 to $1,500 per year. But what the actual FCC order says is the city can recover no more than its costs.
But that's just fees related to the cost of that, but that's not necessarily the lease amount?
That includes the rent in the lease.
Okay.
So the city can charge no more than, people are saying, $500 to $1,500 a year for fees for the application and the lease.
Which is incredibly lower
Yes.
than what we have
Yes.
received in the past from these companies. I mean,
That's correct.
It was in the
And
thousands.
That's correct. And the whole reason for that is because the FCC is trying to help deploy this technology and trying to help the companies to get a lot of these facilities in place.
Wow, okay.
So is that potential fee per antenna?
Yes.
Okay. So they're considering that it will be blanketing a city that you potentially will make up for the difference of a normal negotiation. And now there's also the idea that there are multiple providers. So
yes,
every provider who wants to put one up may
yes.
be on competing poles, or would that be something that we'd have to look at in the future and say, well, there's already one on that pole, so choose a different one? Or has the FCC made any mandates along that line?
There's actually some other laws that require us to make it very, very easy for what's called co-location, which is if there's already a pole with one provider that has a facility, we have very little discretion to prevent another provider from adding on to that same pole and using the same equipment cabinet on that pole.
Which is why some poles end up looking like they're going to fall over.
Yes.
Okay.
Just one more question.
Yes, Ms. Cordova.
And are they still able to go to like private companies or locations and request to have it put on
Yes.
their land? Yeah. Okay.
Can always do that.
So it's not just city that they would seek to put it on.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close our discussion and open for public comment for 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brandon, resident of Lompoc. You know, I'm at kind of a loss for words because some of it's really nice and forward-thinking of it, and some of it's very restrictive. But the point I think I'd like to make most is the background slides kind of highlighted a couple things. Millennials are expecting it quick and fast and cheap, and this industry went to the federal government. They went straight to the people that made the decisions and said, this is how we want it to operate. My overall concern with that is now all of these types of companies, and it will follow with other industries requiring the same type of laws written, is that they're going to jump ahead of all these small businesses, all these other projects, all these other requests. And we drag our feet on requests all day long. So it's hard enough when you live in a town, but now to have these people jump to the front of the line, I say, you know, let's try and embrace this across the board in some manner, some consistency, and let's recognize that these wireless industries are moving fast. So some of the other questions are, what are we going to do with our wireless departments and our technology, or do we need to cease that? Should we reallocate that funding? And should we work ahead to try and capture those locations that are best suiting, such as a Champion Center or a hospital that can serve the better public good for that?
Thank you. Seeing no one else rise, we'll close public comment and bring it back to council. Councilmember Starbuck.
Well, I think the first thing that we've got to do is probably adopt the urgency ordinance, so I'll make a motion that we adopt ordinance 1668, parentheses 19.
Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
And we have a second. Any further discussion? Let's vote. And the urgency passes 5-0. And it only needed 4, so. Then we have the first reading of ordinance 1667, parentheses 19, and the resolution 624719 that we need to pass. Do I have a motion for that, Councilmember Starbuck?
I will move.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Councilmember Starbuck and Councilmember Mosby have moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's vote. And that passes 5-0. Thank you. All right. Open the floor for written communications. Are there any?
Nothing more than you've already
received. And oral communications for 2 minutes on any city subject.
Nick Gonzalez, resident of Lompoc. Earlier I mentioned about the cost allocation and enterprise reimbursement. So in that methodology, 2 years ago, the former city manager was quoted that with the adoption of that methodology, it would provide $1 million for funding for roads. So I'm glad to see that amount is there. It also said, though, that it would provide funding for approximately 8 full-time police officers and 11 firefighters, and $700,000 for infrastructure. So my concern as a resident, if you're using a methodology of taking money from the utility funds and transferring it over to the general fund for very specific uses, and that's not being done, I am concerned. So I would ask the council to make certain that if there are whatever dollar amounts under the methodology that we're supposed to go back to reimburse for public safety goes back to the police and fire for those uses, and that all those methodologies that are used to transfer for those funds, that those funds and that methodology is carried through and not just put in the general fund and then forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Charles Summer, Parks and Recreation Commissioner. I feel that recreation staff is breaking the law. In 2016, in I believe it was October, Parks and Recreation Commission and Council had a joint meeting, and some powers were changed. And City Attorney, then City Attorney Pannoni, stated that state law requires that council set fees for city facilities and city services. And right now, recreation staff is changing fees without council approval at the Lompoc Aquatic Center. And some of those items, as far as 25% increase, which I believe will have a very negative impact on the city's ability to have cost recovery at the facility, which is going to be difficult no matter what, because most pools don't make money, and city pools are typically subsidized at a large amount. And I'd like to see council do something about it. These increases went into effect first in January of this year by the single-use recreation fees. And then as of yesterday, some splash passes and some other items were increased. And as a commissioner and someone who helps run a club swim team there's been a lot of interest of leaving their splash pass program and just coming to the swim team before are usually recommended. We have a very great relationship with the city. The club swim team does not have a learn to swim program, and so the learn to swim program the city has is a great natural progression, 1 to 2. Is that my time limit? Okay, but I'd like to see council stop these increases, which, according to former city attorney Joseph Pannoni, are illegal for staff to do without council approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else rise, we'll close oral communications and bring it back around to council requests, comments, and meeting reports. Councilmember Mosby.
Since the last council meeting, I attended the SBCAG and APCD meetings representing the city. I plan to go to the LAFCO meeting this Thursday. I believe the city manager's looking at going as well. At SBCAG, did have a discussion with Caltrans about probably one of the hottest potholes discussed is on A Street over here, A and Ocean, which is a very complicated pothole because it's jurisdiction on Caltrans Highway, not city, and it's also in between train tracks. So I noticed that there's a gray circle been painted around there. I hope Caltrans is moving forward. I know it's difficult to get the coordination all the way through, as well as there's discussion. I hope it comes forward. It looks like going to be coordinating with the city on what they call active transportation grants that hopefully we can move forward, hopefully, on finding some grant funds for a pedestrian bridge going across the river, and something that's desperately needed. I don't think personally we should be waiting until the Robinson Bridge is replaced before we get a pedestrian, because that could be 10 or 20 years, but at least it's something that's on the table for discussion and moving forward. As well as if I can make a request that at the next budget meeting that resolution number 5902 parentheses 14 be provided. 5902 parentheses 14, unless there's something that has been passed since then. It's general financial principles via resolution that we're supposed to be following for budgeting, I believe. So if I can, I need to make, no, we're good? Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Starbuck.
I have no reports, but I have a quick request. I was wondering, Mr. Throop, I hate to kind of catch you off guard, but could you give us a brief of what the agenda is for LAFCO on Thursday?
The only one I really was worried about was ours.
That's the one I wanted to talk about.
So there, and I'm going to look to Brian too. I haven't been able to read the whole staff report, but it's a continuation. So it started with a few groups that sent in requests to LAFCO, stating that they would like to see, and Lompoc, that's how we were first notified. Lompoc was mentioned in the original report. Bailey Quarter was mentioned in the original report. And it was stating that they would like to have no more ag land, developed. And so that's when I caught wind of it, and I've been going to the meetings, and some of the council members and mayor have been going. They did at one point, when we had Mayor Osborne and Councilmember Mosby went up and myself, they decided at that point to do an ad hoc committee, so they did create an ad hoc committee. They have met. I wasn't able to attend the meeting. We didn't know about it, but now they're talking again about some of the input from the ad hoc committee. They want to bring forward to the full commission and have them have discussion about it. So my goal is to be up there and make sure that they understand again that they need to hear both sides. Because right now, I brought up at the last meeting that they're hearing everything from this side, so it's way out of balance. That scale is out of balance this way. So I'm actually working, trying to find with different schools like universities that can help us with our own side of it, saying what happens from the economy, the economics of it, if they don't allow expansion. So I'll be discussing that too. Yeah.
Would it be fair for me to say, though, that LAFCO is kind of overstepping their bounds here, because they're not the ones that should control the annexation. They would control the services that would be part of the annexation. I mean, counties get smaller, cities get bigger. It's the thing.
In the way LAFCO was originally set up in 1962 or something like that was to prohibit cities that have done it in the past, and you see different ones that happen down south where they'll do strip annexations. They take just a small swath to get to the big piece of pie that they wanted. Other cities have done leapfrogging where they'll jump across and pass up a property because this person wants to develop their property. So it was designed to make sure that everything flowed correctly, that annexations were contiguous, that there wasn't strip annexing going on and other stuff. And over the years, from the 60s through the 70s and up to now, some of those powers have expanded and expanded over time. And I would say, in my own opinion, yes, I think they've overstepped the original desire and outset of what LAFCO was supposed to be doing.
For more information, you can go to sblafco.org/asset.c/1021. They are taking public comments on the report through May 15th, and then it will be reviewed with public discussion at a commission meeting on June 6th. So this is just the first step in starting that discussion at this meeting, but the documents are there. They are collecting it. It is an ongoing ad hoc to make these adjustments, and some of the new recommendations within the 3-page document that will be discussed on Thursday are some of the agreement stipulations they're looking to put in place that require exchanges of one-to-one. So if you utilize prime ag land, which is what they're concerned about being used up for housing, or other than ag land, say it's commercial, they want some sort of exchange put forth for land that's similar. And so some of these restrictions are new, and they're even more restrictive than prior ones, and would limit cities like ourselves that are surrounded by what is considered prime ag land. The second part is what is now considered prime ag land. So there is an outdated definition about what is prime ag land that they need feedback on. And so those of you that are in ag that know what your property is and how valuable it is to still farm on, you should give feedback. And if you're no longer farming it, giving feedback on why it shouldn't become considered prime ag land, so that they change that differentiation. So that's why it's a huge concern, is that it's creating new limitations on potential growth, not just for our city, but other cities as well. But it hits us particularly hard because of what we're surrounded by. Thank you for that. Councilmember Vega.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Councilmember Cordova.
Nothing to report.
I attended Empty Bowls, Denman's open house, the anti-violence candlelight vigil on Sunday night, and spoke at the Republican Women's Luncheon. There are a couple of community events. Again, the reminder that tomorrow morning is the Pinwheels Child Abuse Awareness Ceremony at 8 a.m. here out front of City Hall. Please attend if you're available. And then there's a job fair week that's coming up at the end of the month. So those of you that are job hunting, want to learn how to job hunt, want to prepare for that, there's a workshop on April 23rd to help you prepare. There is a job fair on April 24th, and then there will be an young adult jobs seminar on the 27th. That information is going to be released very soon on social media and through press releases, but I wanted those in the community to be aware of those upcoming events, because I know that's vital to our community, is that job hunting. I have no council requests, and we will adjourn the meeting to the Lompoc City Council meeting for 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, April 16th.